Welcome, everyone. We're going to give it a minute or so and wait for people to come join us. Good to have you all here. Welcome, welcome. We're just going to give it another 30 seconds for people to come in and join us. We are so glad you're spending your Friday with us, listening in to our amazing presentations here. I see that people are still coming onto the chat, so we'll give it another minute. As you all are entering the Zoom, feel free to say hi in the chat. We'd love to hear who you are, where in the world you are, how you are connected to the cohort or the executive program. We'd love to keep the chat a casual and nice interactive part of this event. While we are here in person at the Newmark J School, and the panel participants and panelists are here in person, I know from the sign-up list that we have folks pretty much all over the world joining us virtually, so that's very exciting. Make sure that you, if you want to write to everyone, not just the panelists, that you address your mentions in the chat to everyone as you introduce yourself and say who you are and where you are from. And I think we're slowly getting started. We're kind of reaching a quorum here. So I'll kick things off. Very excited to be here today. My name is Anita Zilina. I'm the program director for the executive program of News Innovation and Leadership at the Craig Newmark Journalism School. We're in Midtown Manhattan here. It's a relatively, not sunny, but at least spring-like day out there. So thank you for joining us on this April 1st for the final presentations of the executive program cohort. We called this event Rethinking Leadership and the Future of Media. And the reason why we did is because the presentations that you're going to hear today are really going to touch on some of the big issues that we have in media. They are going to touch on questions like better management, better leadership, more sustainability. They're going to talk about new business models, about new products, and they're going to tackle one of the big changes: culture, equity, inclusion, and transformation in the industry. I want to thank my colleague, Jeff Jarvis, without whom this would not have been possible, and who's masterfully led us through this year. I want to thank all of our instructors and coaches, and I know many of them are here today. I want to thank the folks who have been incredibly helpful in providing scholarships and support to this program, from the Google News Initiative to the Knight Foundation to the Media Lab Bavaria, and the Center for Community Media and the Finnish Innovation Foundation. Thank you all, and this is all basically your day. I'm very excited to pass things on to our first participant and our first speaker. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Amanda Pike. Amanda, please come up on stage.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Amanda Pike, Director of TV and Documentaries at the Center for Investigative Reporting. For my capstone project, I looked at how CIR can better get its investigative journalism out to Hollywood, TV, film, and streaming platforms. Along the way, it morphed into a realization of the tremendous opportunity for newsrooms to collaborate together on our way to the red carpet, but more on that in a moment. CIR has been producing TV and documentary content for several years. We have 2 feature docs in production right now, but we've been producing these projects more as occasional one-offs with small teams and fairly limited resources. I wanted to create a blueprint for us to scale up our documentary work to become more financially sustainable and a core part of what we do as an organization. There is obviously a huge opportunity here. Documentaries are the fastest growing segment of the streaming industry. From 2016 to the end of 2020, documentary content on streaming platforms skyrocketed by 250%. With the explosion of streaming services, there are more distribution channels clamoring for content than ever before. For the first time, documentary films and series are being produced to compete not only with other informational content, but as movies in and of themselves, presented as entertaining and compelling content alongside blockbuster films. Documentaries are especially attractive for streamers because they're a cost-effective way to satisfy demand for original content. They also increase viewer engagement and retention. There's a huge market for content and obviously a lot of competition to fill those spaces. But in the course of my research, I found that we as newsrooms actually have some competitive advantages. I found 3 themes that highlight how newsrooms can compete and thrive in this space. First, there is a huge appetite for content from journalists. There is also a dearth of really good investigative work. And finally, we all as journalists have a golden opportunity to collaborate and help each other become more successful in this space. As part of my research, I spoke with more than a dozen production companies, as well as distributors, filmmakers, Hollywood agents, legal and business consultants, and other news organizations. I was talking with an acclaimed filmmaker about how CIR can differentiate itself in this space, and they said, you already have what everyone else wants. They were talking about the fact that CIR as a newsroom is constantly generating new and engaging IP for projects. IP, content, stories are the ultimate currency. But this is a much larger opportunity that also applies to dozens of newsrooms across the country. There are so many stories out there that I think a lot of us feel are not getting the audience or the real world impact that they could. And on the other side, there are production companies and distributors actively looking for new and engaging stories. Another thing I found is that there is a genuine appetite in Hollywood for well-told investigative stories. As one distributor told me, there are not a lot of great investigative films out there. I can count them on one hand. We're looking for great access with reporters and sources. Distributors say that it's tough to find compelling documentary content that is truly investigative and revelatory. This investigative space is where newsrooms that specialize in this type of work can excel. As you know, investigative reporting takes time, resources, and specialized expertise, things that most production companies don't have, and TV film budgets usually do not cover the reporting costs necessary for this type of work. This is where nonprofit newsrooms have an advantage. Technical difficulties, and we're off. My biggest realization was the tremendous opportunity for all of us to collaborate in this space. This quote is from a journalist in another newsroom who was talking about their documentary ambitions. Translating work to film has been the trickiest thing for us. We don't have in-house expertise. The platforms where our work appears is not where our audience is. I also heard from colleagues in other newsrooms that while they're interested in getting their stories onto the screen, they're leery of partnerships with production companies that might not share their journalistic ethics or allow them a voice as full editorial partners. This is the space where we can work together. Instead of just focusing on our own work, CIR can reach out and partner with other newsrooms that don't have the resources or bandwidth to produce their own stories. CIR can be a trusted place to help develop and produce their investigative work, since we are journalists ourselves and share their ethics and values. These partnerships are a way to build up the larger journalism ecosystem, helping smaller regional and niche newsrooms raise the profile and potential impact of their stories, while also helping both newsrooms generate revenue to offset philanthropic funding. So let's consider this a call to arms and to collaborate. I hope we can work together to make some great investigative documentaries. I look forward to connecting. Thank you so much. And now I want to introduce my colleague, Angela Moon.
Hi, thank you, Amanda. I'm Angela Moon. I'm the managing editor for Bloomberg News. I run the breaking news operation. I spent the last year looking into hoaxes, fake news, and disinformation that newsrooms have to deal with, and ways for us to avoid, tackle, and stop the spread. For this presentation, I want to focus on a new type of hoax that is increasingly becoming more prevalent, which is in the crypto industry. The popularity of cryptocurrencies and digital assets have created a new set of problems for media organizations, especially for companies like Bloomberg that are heavily focused on providing financial news. These are real examples of hoaxes that Bloomberg and my team fell for in recent months. This one was on September 13th, 2021. I vividly remember this example because not only was my team involved, but because it happened shortly after the US market opened on a Monday morning, which is one of the most busiest times for Wall Street, and thus my team as well. Shortly after 9:30, we received a press release via Globe Newswire, which is a prominent communication services firm that distributes press releases on behalf of companies. The release said Walmart was going to now accept Litecoin as a form of payment. Now, this was big news considering it involved the largest retailer in the US and cryptocurrency. We covered it as fast as we could with big flashy headlines. And it wasn't just us. Almost all of the major publications like the Wall Street Journal, CNBC, and Reuters all picked up the same headlines. It wasn't until a few minutes later that one of our reporters thought it was very unusual for Walmart to partner with a cryptocurrency that isn't well known, like Bitcoin or Ethereum. When the reporter called Walmart, Walmart had no idea what we were talking about. We knew then that this was a hoax, but it was only after the price of Litecoin had shot up more than 30%. Someone made a lot of money that day in a span of just 20 minutes. A few months later, we received another press release saying Kroger was going to accept Bitcoin Cash for payments. Now, we're not stupid. Following the Walmart fiasco, we put in place a system and another layer of verification, which involved getting a second source, meaning instead of just relying on the press release that was sent to us, we will also actively find the same information elsewhere, mostly on the company's website. As soon as we got the release from another communication service provider, PRN Newswire, which is even more prominent than the one that sent the Walmart press release, we checked the Kroger's website, which had the same press release, and decided to cover and send headlines. A few minutes after our headlines moved, Kroger issued a statement saying they had fallen for a hoax and that their website had automatically pulled the wrong press release from PRN Newswire and posted on its page. Bitcoin Cash price shot up more than 5%, and someone again made a lot of money that day. Now, falling for hoaxes have real consequences. Last year, Bloomberg was fined 3.5 million euros for covering a hoax release regarding a French construction group. We had fallen for a hoax release that said the company would revise its 2015 and 16 accounts due to accounting fraud and that its CFO would be fired. The shares of the company fell more than 20% on our news. So why do we fall for them over and over again when clearly isn't a new thing? Well, for one, scammers are getting smarter. The days of typos and grammatical errors are gone, and they are now taking the time, the effort, the resources to come up with press releases that look real. The lack of regulations in the crypto market is also contributing to the scammers entering this field. Unlike other more established markets, the SEC has no idea how to regulate this market, let alone launch investigation into hoaxes. And lastly, we just simply move too fast. News is a highly competitive environment, especially for financial news, especially for real-time news, and especially for breaking news. We don't have a moment to pause and think and verify because that would just slow us down. Obviously, this issue isn't an easy fix at all, but some of my suggested solutions are: one, this should be a cross-country initiative. Companies need to heighten their security measures, especially against hacking. Communication services firms like PRN Newswire and GlobeNet Newswire also need to heighten their security measures and vet their clients. If there is a new crypto company applying to become a client, they should really vet them and make sure that they are legit. Media companies, including Bloomberg, should make hoax trainings absolutely mandatory for reporters and editors and on a regular basis. They should also have regular hoax drills like they do for phishing emails. The awareness that these releases can reach any part of the newsroom should be consistently reminded. Two, given that the depth and the complexity of these hoaxes are only evolving and evolving fast, we need to rely on artificial intelligence to vet these releases that are coming into our system. Although the scammers are getting smarter and these hoaxes are getting more sophisticated, there will be loopholes that only machines would be able to detect. We need to invest the money and resources as individual companies and as an industry to develop AI-backed tools that will help us tackle this issue. Thank you. we have my colleague and the coolest German that I know, Anna.
Thank you, Angela. So my name is Anna, and I've been working for the Bauer Media Group based in Hamburg, Germany for just under 2 years. And I have been Chief of Staff for the Executive Board since the beginning of this year. When I took over this position, the board has just been formed and everything was new. My position, the members of the board, and I hadn't really heard of this position before, so it was all better that the Capstone project helped me to get an idea of what the role was like. So I really would like to talk with you about the question, what exactly is a Chief of Staff and what does it mean for the Bauer Media Group? So what is the position of the Chief of Staff actually, and why do more and more companies have one? There's a problem. Today, the world is becoming more and more complex and fast moving, especially the media world. This means that the decision makers, the business leaders, need support to manage this complexity. The solution, a Chief of Staff. A multi-talented person who holds the threads together, communicates, and sees the big picture. So what should the profile of a Chief of Staff look like? The Chief of Staff position is a typical high potential position, usually taken by someone who has already worked in an executive or a director position, and it doesn't no matter whether the position is filled internally or externally, both have advantages and disadvantages. But the person in this position must have organizational skills as well as people skills. And a Chief of Staff must have implementation skills, the ability to work in a team, be structured, and work diligently. Typically, the position is done for 1.5 to 2 years before he or she goes back to an executive position within the company. So it's a typical formal rotating and return position. In addition to the skills just mentioned that a Chief of Staff must have, a Chief of Staff must take on various roles. On the one hand, he's a kind of air traffic controller. He helps the CEO and the management to gain more security and orientation in decision-making. On the other hand, he's an integrator and ensures that internal boundaries and barriers are overcome. As a communicator, the Chief of Staff connects top management with the rest of the company. The Chief of Staff is also a dialogue partner and helps the CEO and the executive board to be more far-seated, and he's not guided by particular interests. As a representative of the board, he acts free from any political agenda. And last but not least, as a caretaker, he ensures that structures are created and achieve the above. So with the above roles, the Chief of Staff has 2 missions. Firstly, he set the business rhythm for the executive board meetings. And secondly, he serves as an advisor and link between the executive board and the organization and the stakeholders. So what exactly does that mean for the Bauer Media Group? I have a vision. My vision is to ensure, together with my team, that the executive board can successfully lead the Bauer Media Group through the transformation and the company into the future. To this end, we support and empower the top of the company every day. So knowing how exactly a Chief of Staff is supposed to work, which is important to support the Bauer Media Group Executive Board, I'm very excited to return and fulfill the vision. Finally, I would like to thank you. Thank you to CUNY, Anita, Jeff, Mayuri for making the year and the stay here a very special experience. I would also like to thank my mentor, Shasna Nessa, who has always been with me by my side over the past months and given me so valuable advice. A big thank you to my employer, Bauer Media Group, to the executive board for giving me this opportunity to participate in this program and to be able to be in New York for the past 2 weeks full of concentration. And thank you to my friends and family, the CUNY cohort 2022. You are very special for me, and thank you also for Angela, my new Korean half sister. You're amazing. Thank you. And I'm very happy to hand over to my colleague and friend, Annika, now. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you, Anna. So, my name is Annika Ruoranen, and I work as the head of digital services in YLE Finnish Broadcasting Company. This year, with this cohort 2022, has been truly amazing. These countless talks, articles, and new frameworks we have really brightened my thinking and proved to myself that I actually knew and know quite a lot about media business and leadership. In the middle of the year, I had a chance to jump into a new role and work closely with our two main digital services in YLE. To succeed in my new role, I really wanted to recognize the most important themes I should concentrate on and build on my work in the coming months. I will now walk you through 5 most important themes I discovered. First, management. After organizational changes, when everything is new and many things are still moving and things are more abstract, start with the basics. When I spoke to experts who worked, or if not exactly at the same role, at least very close to my position I was moving into, the discussion quickly started to revolve around structures. Product leadership clearly meant discussion, meeting, a clarity in the decision-making chain. Where difficulties were present, those were often due to unclear decisions made by wrong people at the wrong times. So at the beginning, start with that and build routines, meetings, contact points in the newly designed organization. After routines, it is time to go back to the beginning. We might already know quite a lot about our audience, but it is important to really understand the needs and lives of the audience to be able to build a product that is needed and valued. What dreams, fears, and needs do they have, and how exactly can we be involved in their lives? Helping with and meeting those needs. Understanding the audience and customers' experience should be at the heart of decision-making, even in news media, often driven by journalistic values. But after understanding your audience, you need to have a clear and commonly shared value proposition. Make it together to get everyone on board. Make it usable, and make it usable in a way that everyone can go back to the roots and remind themselves to whom and why we are working and what is our uniqueness on the market. However, practice alone is not enough. It is important to communicate the value proposition through the company and get everyone to commit to what has been agreed on. It's been said that data is new oil, and we've gone all the way to get as much data as possible. We've built data-driven businesses, installed dashboards, and sent daily emails to give everyone easy access to data. And don't get me wrong, goal setting and KPIs are really important and needed, but only if metrics are well chosen. So my 4th takeout is that after you have done your research on audience's needs, created a value proposition that the key stakeholders share, then you choose your metrics that help you choose them wisely and make it and take time and errors. And do not only think about companies' needs, you need to have metrics that serve your audience. When I started with my final project for the CUNY, I really wanted to know who is actually leading. Who should be in charge? Is it content, or is it a product, or is it something else? I learned from the interviews that my questions were really actually wrong and irrelevant. Success comes only if there is common understanding of things and decisions are made together. And that's my 5th takeaway. It all goes back to the psychological safety that is built over time, over language that is understandable to everyone in the room. Common language creates a sense of common discussion, and then decision making is slightly easier. Certainly never easy, and responsibilities don't have to be disputed. Content and service development have their own strengths that both sides understand. The most important thing is constant conversation and the feeling of being heard. With these insights, I will continue my work as a head of digital services in YLE. The change might take time, but I'm positive that things will be built on stronger base than before. Thank you. Now it's time to hear my great colleague, Antonia.
So, hello, nice to be here. I'm not seeing my show notes, but never mind. Oh yeah, here they are. I'm Antonia from Germany, and in the United States, basically everyone is talking about the Great Resignation. In Germany, not so much, and I think that is a big problem. So for my capstone project, I talked to journalists who quit their jobs. You could say these people have broken up with legacy media, and if you think about it, who could provide us with better and more honest feedback about our industry and newsroom culture than those people who have left? And I have to say, I really learned a lot in these interviews and from my interview partners, and this is why I want to share their voices today. So the following quotes are from 3 journalists out of 10 who have shared their experiences with me. All of them come like me, as you can tell by my accent probably, from Germany, and they've worked for different German newspapers and magazines. All of them started with passion, with motivation, and they left with feelings like anger, like frustration, like anxiety. I asked my classmates, Sewell, Hilary, Maritza, and Soraya, to read the quotes from the interviews.
I experienced how a 60-person editorial team was reduced to 20 people within a year. The workload exploded, and so did the pressure. It felt like I was working on a galley, and then it slowly started, the back pain. I could no longer sit. I felt exhausted. I drank too much alcohol. My doctor diagnosed burnout, including depression. My manager just said, "Burnout, back pain? You can't. You can't get sick now. I need you." Instead of support, I was called in for a meeting with management because I had gone to the doctor during working hours.
As a young journalist, I was working as a freelancer for a regional newspaper, and they had promised me a job. Suddenly, I didn't hear from them anymore. I asked what was going on. I received an email, a one-liner from the editor-in-chief saying that they no longer had any use for me. I can still remember the moment. I cried because of the job, but also because it felt so painful how little they cared about me, that they didn't even ask me to come in for a personal conversation.
I started a podcast 2 years ago. I paid for the equipment myself since the company will not invest in any new projects. At some point, frustration set in because I realized that I got engaged as an employee and I started new projects, but it would do me any good. No, it would even harm me. I was getting the same salary as before and my new task on top of the others. This was one of the reasons my colleague and I started to work on our own business plan. We created our dream job and we can achieve something great. I had truly missed this kind of mission.
I'll never work with men again if I feel they don't take me seriously. Too often, I was supposed to take the role of the token woman. That happened to me once quite obviously, where I was offered half the money as the man in the same editor-in-chief position. All publishers want women right now, but they should cost nothing and be grateful.
Yeah, thank you for reading those quotes. And of course, I want to thank all of my interviews partners for opening up. I mean, you heard what all of them truly missed: a healthy, open, inclusive workplace culture and a vision of the future. I guess most of us would agree that trust, empathy, diversity are important. But I asked myself, are we truly bringing these values to work every day? I mean, are we working as hard on these problems as we do on our next cover story? Well, I guess in many cases, no. So in my capstone, I came up with 5 ideas to change our newsroom culture. And it all starts with compassionate managers, with leaders, with people who can lead people and help them to grow, to help them to develop their career paths. So I really feel it's important that we look at people as our most valuable resource, because actually they are. So you find the details and concrete actions I would recommend in my paper in the chat. Please feel free to download the paper, share with others, and add your own ideas. One thing I really wanted to share, all of my interview partners are happy with their decision, so good for them. But I can tell you, we've lost some really great and creative minds. And it's pretty sad for our newsrooms. At least some of them stayed close to the industry or in the industry, and they are reinventing it as founders or consultants. So please reach out for further discussions. I'd love to start projects with you, and I'm convinced we can only achieve this together. Thank you. And now I want to hand it over from north to south to my great colleague, Christian.
Thank you, Antonia. Hi, everybody. I'm Christian Moser and working as Chief Content Manager at the Catholic Media House Michaelsbund in Munich. Now talking about corporate culture as a driver of innovation. Corporate culture is a significant factor, especially when it comes to innovation. It's not enough to offer free drinks, some fruits, or a gym membership. That's nice to have. But to anchor innovation in a company, other fundamentals are necessary. But how do employees become more open to innovation, especially in a traditional media company where many processes have been deep-rooted for years? From my perspective, there is no one game changer. It takes many small steps to get there. During the pandemic, communication suffered or even stopped existing. From one day to the next, the offices have been empty. New workflows for editorial conferences were created very quickly, but the conversations in the lounge, in the hallway, or the coffee kitchen, they no longer existed. Often, these were the opportunities to talk to employees about their feelings, private situations, or even challenges at work quite casually. For this reason, I started to pay special attention to those who seemed depressed or stricken in the meetings. After that, I called the colleagues to talk about their concerns. In the meantime, I have reduced this active approach to the employees, but at the same time, I have noticed that they are coming to me more and more frequently with spontaneous video calls when something isn't right or is causing them concern. A relatively simple way to talk to employees about successes in their work is a so-called well-run reflection. Each member in the editorial conference briefly says what has gone particularly well in the past few weeks. This could have been a special radio feature, a positive reaction from listeners, or a great reach of a podcast. Each of the posts is briefly commented on and praised by the editor-in-chief. The session takes about half an hour, but it's time well spent. Even during the first round, it was obvious how the mood of the participants changed from a rather tense situation to a positive one. And this way, employees can present the performance that was particularly outstanding for them. And this leads to much greater transparency within the editorial team. To get a better idea of the hurdles we face on our way to becoming an innovative company, we conducted a field study at Michaelsbund. One of the findings was that employees miss having a company network. A small innovative team has developed a prototype for an offer to strengthen communication and networking within the circle of colleagues. In half an hour, a staff member presents a topic she or he is passionate about, from music records to cheerleading, or what it's like to write hiking guides. The goal is to get to know each other better, or maybe even get new inspiration and ideas for the job. Innovation thrives on exchange. Only those who share their experiences and discuss with others will be able to gather further ideas and suggestions. At Michaelsbund, we have a powerful radio editorial team. That's why we want to publish our journey to an innovative and agile company in a podcast. This product is to be released once a month on popular podcast platforms. At the same time, it will be posted on the two professional networking platforms, Xing and LinkedIn. This should help to position Michaelsbund more strongly as an innovative media company, and it seems particularly helpful in attracting new employees. At the same time, the hope is that the podcasts and regular posts on the networking platforms will also enable innovation and change managers to keep speaking up with advice, tips, and ideas. And by the way, the podcast also helps us with internal communication. Well, it takes many small steps to make a company more innovative and in a sustainable way, and it's a long journey, but no one should let that stop them. Even a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first small step. Thank you very much for your time. And now I hand it over to my dear colleague, Cynthia DuBose.
Thanks, Christian. This morning, I'm going to explore whether robots can restore local journalism. During our executive program, we studied the jobs to be done framework. This framework helps you answer what job is our customer trying to get done. These are jobs from the customer's perspective, not the company's. For us, our readers were attempting to get information like high school sports scores, real estate prices, restaurant inspections, information that historically flooded newspaper pages and connected communities. Unfortunately, making that connection in today's world was no longer economically viable for us. We wanted our journalists focused on journalism. Could AI help restore those opportunities in an economically viable way and fulfill the job our users were hiring our brands to do? There are already numerous media organizations using some form of AI or machine learning. I identified a number of experiments to close that information gap and help us discover whether AI could deliver unique data to our audiences, both old and new. In the second half of 2021 at McClatchy, we launched 4 AI implementations across 7 markets. For real estate, we paired a newsroom editor with a vendor and trained a bot to scrape real estate prices and create trend articles. For high school sports, we tested a vendor who used machine learning to publish short high school game summaries. For data viz, we provided specific URLs to a vendor who used that data to create embeddable visualizations. And for AI-powered social publishing, we tested a company that utilizes a bot to learn about our social media audience and improve our publishing schedule. To date, these AI-powered projects have exceeded our expectations in growing reach and bringing new unique visitors to our sites. So how do we do it? To get started, we researched. Organizations like Journalism AI or New York City Media Lab exist to inform media organizations about AI's potential. We also talked to other publishers who were happy to help us build on what they had already completed, especially when it came to local news. Next, we explored what our newsroom could handle. We looked for reporters who wanted to join vendor calls and talk the language. We looked for editors who could speak passionately about a topic of interest and convince any vendor to try this test. Lastly, we socialized our experiments. It was important for us to be transparent throughout this entire process. We held kickoff meetings in newsrooms, answered any and all questions, and pointed to examples from other publishers. We even labeled our content with a bot byline and produced a footer to explain how the content was produced. We set up an email for readers to send questions or observations. Soon we realized we needed a champion. someone who could lead the efforts in each market. The ideal champion is curious, data-driven, not necessarily a data whiz, but someone who knows where the data is coming from and understands what's available, and fearless. These experiments forced us all to step outside of our comfort zones. There were times when things went wrong and others when things went so right, we were asked to speed up. The right champion isn't scared of failure, but relish in what they've learned. It's important to note that many times when testing in AI, you won't have a lot of evidence to help you shape that first goal. So take your best informed guess, commit to reviewing the data to see whether you were too ambitious or too conservative, and adjust. Here are just a few examples of goals that might relate to your AI experiments. So I get asked a lot what went wrong, and I wanted to share that as well as pair that with what we learned. At one point, our bot posted several unfinished stories in a row and flooded social media handles. The lesson: always have a fail-safe. The flood produced reader feedback. However, we had already armed customer service and our newsrooms with the tools they needed to answer readers. And the last bullet was a surprise. After launching the experiment, I heard from other newsrooms who wanted to test more topics. I, on the other hand, was not ready to expand that quickly. And so I learned that I should have had a formal way to solicit ideas from newsrooms as they saw what was happening. My capstone deliverable, which will be dropped in the chat, is a newsroom editor's guide to understanding AI. After interviews with editors and those who help newsrooms establish projects, it was clear that most editors don't even know where to start when it comes to AI. The guide will empower editors to ask the right questions, seek the right resources, and have a step-by-step plan of how they can bring AI into their newsrooms. I believe the work of our journalists is irreplaceable. Robots cannot restore local journalism, but they can help us restore our brands to the community hubs they once were. Thank you. And now, all the way from Augsburg, my colleague, Daniel Kempf.
Thank you, Cynthia. And from AI, we're going now to the organizational processing in our companies. And I want to talk this morning a bit about how we can reconnect media companies in times of hybrid work, transformation, and change. We are facing through the last years of big transformations and mostly digital-oriented products, a huge impact on our organizational structures. And now we had this 2 years of pandemic. We even getting worse in working together and struggling with processes in this very special situation. So the question for us and me with my team was how we can deal with this and how we can bring more performance back to our companies and to help them to get a better organizational structure. So the question is how we can break the silos. And we did a lot of user research. We did interviews in our companies, but also with other media companies, with tech companies and ventures. And so what we found out is that in traditional organizational structures and in the processes, in the end, it's all about trust and empathy between departments, between units, between partners working together. And so we discussed how we can change this. And then we created and came to this, we call it magic triangle. So an interconnected framework we build up for more business success to help to connect the content, the tech, and the marketing teams together to bring the trust, empathy back to create more performance. And with this framework, we started right now and running a pilot now and happy to share more information after this process. So what it is, what brings out is at first that you have to set clear goals. And we have now one agenda, not 10 or 20, we have one agenda, one clear agenda where all the people are knowing, and we created this with integrated OKRs. There's a clear roadmap. only one roadmap and everyone knows what to do. The third is bring the responsibility into this process, bring the responsibility into your organization. And so we created a product board where all the relevant people sitting and sharing this responsibility. And fourth, we created resources to help and to integrate new formats for interdisciplinary work. So when we headed again back to the interviews, we thought that it's a really huge difference for us. So we came out with this framework back to our partners we interviewed. And so we started now and very successful and exciting process. And so I hope this is a starting point, not only for this company, but for the whole industry. And what we want to do is make a clear difference and start the age of real interdisciplinary working and help to create better journalism in our company and Germany and over the whole world. And if you have any question, please reach out to me via the chat or connect me on LinkedIn. And thank you very much. Thank you. And with this, all the way from Brazil, coming here to New York, the fabulous Daniela Flor. Daniela, stage is yours.
Thank you, Daniel. Hi, I'm Daniela, and I'm the audience product owner at Estadão, one of the oldest running Brazilian newspapers. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I've learned during this past year at an audience team and as part of this cohort regarding the sea of numbers and data that we now have in tools that almost every newsroom has, even if it's just like a simple Google Analytics account. So we are surrounded by a lot of possible metrics to use, and they can tell you very different things. So stories that bring you page views will not always bring you the most conversions or qualified traffic. And as my capstone, I decided to run a diagnosis of how different parts of the company I work at were using the available data and tools to make decisions. And I did that by conducting interviews with people on both the newsroom and on business teams and looking into our available data. So I'll share some of the lessons I learned about setting those KPIs. And my first input is that if you want to create reasonable KPIs at a media company, you should spend more time deciding on what questions you want to ask about your numbers than just staring at them and looking for insights. So journalists have editorial instincts, and they will have a bunch of ideas about what stories usually resonate with the audience. So try to put their instincts or your instincts into check. Pick assumptions. For example, what does the team think is the kind of story that drives subscriptions? So then you can search for this actual answer in your data. In this case, you could even transform this into a KPI, like a subscriber engagement metric, the number of pages subscribers read per month on a section. Another thing that became clear to me in those conversations is that people do want palpable KPIs to follow. So if they're not showing interest, it's probably because the goal behind is not clear. So especially in mission-oriented areas such as a newsroom, just breaking the records is not enough to engage people to pursue KPIs if the whys are not clear and widely communicated. So you should start from understanding the bigger goals company-wide. Is it subscriptions, ad revenue, is it both? And only then break those into smaller ones. That is questioning how each area can contribute to the company goals. My third insight is that it's hard to create a data-oriented company, but it's much harder to maintain one. So journalists are getting more into tackling business challenges, but the moment the goals are not clear, the tools are confusing, people will easily go back to just trusting their gut, which again is an instinct, and not challenging their assumptions. So here, consistency is key. It can take from weeks to years to embed some company-wide success metrics into a routine. So analyze the process first. What things will need to buy in? Spend time talking to people to see what do they care about and how this could be translated into a metric or goal. And also have a data governance model. It can be just as simple as like a spreadsheet for the company or your team with what metrics you have, what are their meaning, what tools are the go-to for them, and who should be following those. So you avoid a lot of mistakes and like old dashboards, wrong numbers, and wrong decisions. A lot of times we think that a data-guided company needs to have all those panels and numbers, complex formulas, and that if you don't have all the resources, you won't get there. But the problem is usually not on the availability of data, but on how it is presented and summarized. So you can have just a couple of simple indicators as long as they're actionable. So when you look at those numbers, can you take actions based on them? If not, it's not worth following or using as a KPI. It's the same with reports, graphics. The most used data are ones that are easy to find and easy to understand. So we have a lot going on in the newsrooms, so KPIs have to be simple. The last thing is that conversion, whatever it means in our business, is not about success. It is about habit and relationships. And so should the KPIs be. News products are not an impulsive buy thing. And even if they were, you would have to make an effort to maintain the user. So don't let ego-filling metrics get in the way. It's nice to have a story with a lot of page views, but what if people are not staying? They're not reading the story because there is a paywall and they're not paying for it. So don't focus only on volume metrics. Your KPIs should represent your reader's journey. So think frequency, recency, amount of themes or sections consumed. And I want to end with a metaphor an editor I interviewed for this project told me. And she explained that she sees metrics as guiding lights and the news organizations as tiny boats on a really rough sea. So what I suggest is don't concentrate on the shiniest light just because. Prefer to follow the ones that will actually guide your way and help you navigate. So thank you. And outro to my friend and colleague. So I'll pass it on to Gabriel.
Thank you, Daniela. Wasn't that great? Thank you, Daniela. You're amazing. And thank you, everyone, for being with us here today. We're super honored for your presence and for your time. My name is Gabriel. I'm not here for my sexy accent, and I'm going to say that outright because I know you're thinking about that. And also, I'm not the sexiest dancer in this cohort, so let me put that out there. I've been in this business for 25 years, and one of my biggest frustrations working in every single platform, magazines, newspapers, the internet, is every time I try to innovate or do something new, it's been a very frustrating experience. So as part of my experience here at CUNY, I spoke to multiple professionals from our industry, from places like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Texas Tribune, every size and every type of news organization. And I came up with a few insights that I would like to share with you today. I'm going to focus on some of them because obviously we don't have time to go through all of them. But the first thing that came out constantly is a clear, problematic lack of clarity of what we mean with innovation. If we're going to start an innovation process, we need to know what we want to do, what we want to achieve. So this definition of innovation, whatever that is for you and your news organization, is extremely important. One of the overlaps is that both when we're trying to innovate and when we're doing our work on a daily basis is that we're dealing with novelty. So one of my current obsessions is finding those touch points where innovation and the coverage of news can overlap and where we can find those opportunities to do new things within our newsrooms. This is my personal definition of innovation in a newsroom. I think it's really important to have a clear idea of how we want to serve our audiences in new and different ways. Surprisingly, after multiple conversations, nobody complained about a lack of ideas in their newsrooms. And this is important because wherever we locate our innovation within our spaces, within our news organization, is going to make a difference. I spoke to people that have research media labs, and I also spoke to people that are working towards integrating this innovation closer in their news coverage. My personal preference is to integrate innovation because this generates processes, workflows, and a culture of innovation, which I'm going to speak about at the end of this presentation. Also, categorizing and prioritizing these innovations. As I mentioned, there's no lack of ideas in this newsroom. In anything, if anything, there's a very, very specific need for us to categorize, to prioritize, and to select these ideas properly. Something else that I came out with is that especially newsrooms that are very mature in their innovation process are very clear on the things they do not want to do. They don't want to chase the shiny ideas and the shiny products anymore, and they're shying away from doing what the larger organizations are doing. Specifically, they say very clearly and very out loud that they don't want to do what the New York Times is doing. And I'm just gonna take a moment to appreciate Helvetica. I hope that you notice that my presentation is in this font. And because we're in New York, it's a moment of appreciation for Helvetica. And also, another surprise was that nobody complained about a lack of resources. We know that resources are never enough and nobody has endless resources. But there is a clear idea, a clear sense that if we're going to ask our newsrooms to do more, we also need to take workloads off their plates. And this is important because there's a lot of innovation fatigue, there's a lot of burnout. And if we want to ask for new ideas and for innovation within these newsrooms, we have to be mindful of these workloads. Another thing is that if we are going to do something new, any new product, any new idea, any new project, it requires its own specific set of resources. And finally, if we go through this process over and over again, and we're open and willing to go to take the steps that are necessary for innovation, and especially if we're open to communicate these efforts, to communicate this vision, to communicate this strategy openly, and to listen to what our journalists and the whole news organization wants to do, is willing to do, is open to do, and to create, for example, portals for ideas, we're going to be much more successful in bringing more people to the table and looking for opportunities like, say, redesigning our news meeting, which honestly, because I've been exposed to many news meetings all over the world, they suck. And I think it's a great moment for us to look into these opportunities, to look for opportunities to innovate, and maybe it's time to redesign the news meeting. Thank you so much. This is my Twitter contact, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Please reach out, and I would be more than happy to keep discussing innovation with you. And now I'm going to leave you with my fabulous colleague from Switzerland, George.
Thanks, Gabriel. And also thank you for appreciating Helvetica, which was invented actually near the city I come from Basel, Switzerland. So, hello everybody. Thank you for being here, and good evening to all our friends in Switzerland as well. My name is George, and I'm here to talk to you about my experiences here at CUNY and how these learnings could reshape the Swiss media industry. I have to give you some background here at first. The cornerstone of Swiss society is direct democracy. This political system requires that all mature Swiss citizens are informed about social and political discourse in such a way that they can participate in democratic processes. The media make an essential contribution to that. However, Swiss media are facing growing problems similar to those experienced in other countries, like market failure, layoffs in publishing houses, media concentration, as a result, a lack of diversity in the media landscape, and also lack of trust. The problem has reached society, and we discussed it. So what did we do? Obviously, we voted. In February this year, we voted on state aid for media. A clear case, you might think. So what could possibly go wrong? Well, more than 50% of the voters said no to state aid for media. Arguments against were lack of trust in media if they got paid by the government, and also that especially the big publishing houses would profit the most from it, so it would distort the market. To make it short, it was a catastrophe for media houses and journalists who hoped for the money. Big question is, what now?
This is where CUNY comes in. I went to CUNY to learn about the latest trends in media industry, leadership, and product development. What I got were even more questions, but also great lessons, especially in the field of strategy. The game changer for me were the lessons by Dr. Elizabeth Hansen-Shapiro about business strategies, in particular lessons about performance gaps and opportunity gaps. By analyzing these models and frameworks and adapting it to our situation in Switzerland, I discovered an opportunity gap, a strategic chance for the Swiss media industry. So please let me introduce to you my capstone project, the Swiss Media Incubator, a fitness program for media and tech enthusiasts. At first, this was planned just as a concept paper, but the more I discussed it with experts in Switzerland, across Europe and the United States, the more I came to the conclusion, hey, we can actually build that. And this is what I do now. I work on this project together with my partner and dear friend, Nadine Klopfenstein-Frey from the Zurich University of Applied Sciences in Winterthur. So how does it work? At first, we identified innovative projects with market potential. During the incubation phase, the participants receive know-how, coaching, even some money. We connect the program participants with investors, partners, also foundations. And the goal is to make the projects market ready and scalable within 6 months. By doing this, we could create plus 10 market ready media and tech companies each year for the Swiss media industry. I will tell you 4 reasons why this will work. First, the culture. We are an entrepreneurial friendly environment in Switzerland. We got the right people. We have high educated professionals in the IT and media industry, a network of media entrepreneurs, technical universities, and J schools. We have the market for it because we need orientation, trust in media for our direct democracy. And we even got a lot of the needed key success factors, like, for example, foundations with the clear focus on promoting and strengthening diversity in the media. And I will give you a lot of reasons why it works, because across Europe, there's already a vast network of media innovation programs. So actually, we would fill a gap here and we could support each other and flourish together. Thank you very much. And if you want to learn more about it, just a second. If you want to learn more about it, please reach out to me. And I want to thank you, and you want to use this opportunity to thank you and all the people who guided me on this way to the capstone project. And especially, I want to thank you, Professor Alexandra Borchert, who was a fantastic and inspiring capstone coach. Thank you very much. And that is, I want to hand over to my dear colleague, Geraldine Seeley.
Thank you so much, George, and hello, everyone. I'm Geraldine Seeley, Managing Editor of the Marshall Project, a nonprofit newsroom focused on criminal justice in the United States. For my capstone project, I examined an evolution in our journalism. The Marshall Project was created to produce journalism that seeks to expose injustice and spur policy change. But in recent years, we have also begun producing journalism designed to serve the information needs of people most affected by the criminal justice system. I traced this evolution and interviewed my colleagues to consider what work we need to do as we commit to community engagement as a core part of our mission. And I hope that others will take some lessons from this exploration as well. First, a little about our origins. The Marshall Project was founded in 2014. Our mission statement, in short, is to create and sustain a sense of national urgency about the US criminal justice system. In our early years, we largely focused on getting our journalism to people with the power to push for change, policymakers, academics, and advocates, through partnerships with national outlets such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, NPR, and the Atlantic, among others. Here are a few examples of Marshall Project journalism that made an impact early on. An unbelievable story of rape, produced with ProPublica, led to better training for how first responders approach victims of sexual assault. Addict as Ghosts, a series with the New York Times that investigated violence at upstate New York prisons, led to meaningful action regarding complaints of abuse by officers. And Life Inside, our personal essay column that provides a platform for people in the system to write about their lived experiences, has reached millions of readers. But until a few years ago, we had no real way of connecting Life Inside or any of our work with the audience that could best relate to it, people in prison and jails. That is changing. As our staff has grown, we have become more varied in our journalism experience and personal backgrounds, including staff who have been incarcerated. And under their leadership, we have developed products that engage with and inform new audiences, including people in prisons and jails. News Inside is a print publication distributed in more than 600 correctional facilities and to thousands more incarcerated readers via tablets. We also launched a video version of News Inside called Inside Story. Building on this connection to readers behind bars, we created a first of its kind political survey of thousands of incarcerated people and a COVID survival guide designed for people in prison. Another project called Testify examined judicial elections and racial disparities in criminal court outcomes in the Cleveland area. We worked with the local group, the Cleveland Documentaries, who interviewed dozens of community members whose perspectives informed our reporting. After publication, we had conversations in the community, including office hours with our staff, a local radio show featuring the voices of Clevelanders, and a voicemail line where people are leaving messages and questions for us. These conversations and our reporting are ongoing. A Cleveland-based news team will continue this work, and it will be one of several teams across the country run for and by people in their own communities. These are just a few projects that show how our newsroom is evolving to serve community needs. But we have work to do as a staff to flesh out what community engagement journalism means at the Marshall Project and where it's going. And that's what I focus my capstone on. I interviewed more than a dozen of my colleagues to hear their thoughts and started by asking them how they define engagement journalism. Here's a sample of what some people said. It's asking people what their information needs are and trying to serve them. It's allowing the audience to be a partner in creating our journalism. And it's trusting the audience as experts in their personal life experience. Internally, we describe the principles that guide our engagement journalism this way. We have a commitment to serving and closely engaging with communities, including incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people and their families. And our goal is to build and maintain a sense of trust with the audiences we cover without sacrificing journalistic integrity or editorial independence. But my colleagues agreed that we have work to do to fully commit to community engagement as a core part of our mission moving forward. And I think of that work as falling into 4 different buckets. First is collaboration. Right now, the teams that work on engagement journalism and traditional investigations are largely separate. And we need to consider how we can better integrate those teams and that work. Training. Most of our reporters aren't steeped in engagement journalism principles and techniques, and we have more work to do there so that eventually engagement is not a task performed by just a few people, but is baked into everything we do. Resources. Right now, we have 1 full-time engagement reporter. We're adding more to our local newsrooms, but we'll need to consider building more resources into our budgets and our organizational structure. And finally, going back to our mission, to create and sustain a sense of urgency about the criminal justice system. As a staff, I hope we talk about whether that statement is expansive enough to include some of the work we're doing to serve audiences that have long understood that urgency because it's part of their lived experience. I'm looking forward to continuing to explore these questions with my colleagues, and I hope to explore them with you too, if you want to reach out and talk about it. Thank you so much for listening. And now it is my pleasure to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Hilary Fry.
Hi, I'm Hilary Fry, and I wanted to explore how we can make layoffs in media more humane and a better experience for employees. So why did I take on this project? First, because just since we started dealing with coronavirus, 37,000 media workers have been in the US have been laid off, furloughed, or had their pay reduced. Secondly, because I've personally presided over or been involved in dozens of layoffs in the last decade at NBC News, Fusion, and HuffPost, where I was recently the executive editor until about a year ago. And every time there were mistakes that could and should have been avoided. So how did I go about putting this together? I wanted to hear from people who had been laid off from their jobs in media to document some best and worst practices that newsroom leaders should keep in mind when they have to confront the terrible reality of cutting staff. I created a Google survey with 19 questions, a mix of multiple choice and open-ended, and shared it on Twitter. And that will also be dropped in the chat here if you want to take a look at it. 80 journalists from newspapers, magazines, and digital outlets shared their stories with me. So the following recommendations are drawn from their personal experiences. So here are 8 rules. I'm sure there are more, but here are the starting 8 to follow if you have to confront layoffs at your own company. Try to ensure severance is reasonable. This is subjective, but I don't think 2 weeks is ever enough. Push back if you don't agree with your company policy. Be direct. Layoffs are often announced in an all-hands meeting with a too lengthy preamble about tough times and the industry context. Cut all that and state clearly that people are losing their jobs today. Don't get into succession plans. Even this first meeting should center the individuals losing their jobs, not those who will survive, for lack of a better word. Deliver the news in person, personally. Centering the employee's experience requires communication to come from a familiar person, even if it takes longer and draws out the process. Zoom is only a backup. HR should be there to support, not lead the conversation. Managers should be free to tell people they did great work, that we support them and will miss them. Sometimes employees are informed and sent to another room with HR. A better process would be having that personally known manager and an HR representative present for the layoff conversation, with the manager leading in communication and the HR person there for paperwork and follow-up information only. Have real answers about the why. No one wants to say, we had to cut X million dollars from the budget, and when we looked at what was most valuable for the bottom line, your team didn't make it. But we have to. If this or some other reasoning isn't made clear, the overwhelming assumption is that the layoff is performance related. I heard this again and again in the feedback I collected. On top of losing their job, they should not be blaming themselves. No non-competes or NDAs. And corporations should not mandate signing non-disparagement agreements or non-competes as a term of severance or employment for that matter, in my opinion. Employees should be free to share their experiences privately or publicly. Normalize and humanize the exit process. Journalists shouldn't be treated like criminals when they're laid off. Security shouldn't be involved unless there is a credible threat to someone's safety. Don't lock employees out of their email immediately or their other systems. They need time to collect contacts, clips, designs, and other work that may be useful to them in their job search. Ensure your employees have time to say goodbye and to collect their personal belongings. If you want to go the extra mile, deputize a remaining employee to take laid off employees out for a beer or coffee and pay for it yourself if the company won't cover it. Follow up. Ask HR to follow up the day after layoffs to ensure that your former employees know who to contact with questions as they come up and to make sure they are available to answer any questions about unemployment insurance, benefits, job placements, or anything else. So in conclusion, layoffs are terrible. We can all agree on that, and they will never go perfectly. But following these rules, we can mitigate the awfulness with humanity, empathy, and attention to detail. And I want to thank you and specifically thank Anita and Jeff for this program and my cohort, but mostly the 80 people out there. Thank you who shared your stories with me. I couldn't have done this without your candor and just total openness. So thank you so much. And now I have the pleasure of introducing my inimitable colleague who brings the woo to this program, Maritza.
Buenos dias, mi gente. How are you? It is a pleasure for me to be with you today. I'm really, really excited and really nervous as well. So let me tell you something. Life is full of numbers, years, kilos, friends, money, the steps that we must take to be healthy, grades, salaries. We grew up celebrating the achievements we associate with math. How many birthdays, how much money we make, how many kids we have. We put a number to the most important events and memories. Since we were kids, we were taught to believe that numbers are more important than stories. As adults, we continue to echo that old school thinking. How many video views? For how long? How many likes? How many shares? How much we make? How much profit our business earns? We measure everything in black and white without understanding we live in an eternal grayscale. I did it for a long time too, but a pandemic was enough to unlearn the old tricks. Hello, I'm Maritza Felix. I'm an immigrant, I'm a Latina, I'm a journalist, hablo español. I'm the founder of Connect Arizona, and yes, I am a coffee addict. And I want you to ask you something. How do you measure success? How do you measure impact? Can we tell the future of journalists by reading the coffee grounds? Yes, we can. This is how a typical cafecito looks like, everybody getting together, drinking coffee and this. And if we use a traditional way of measuring success, let me tell you what I have been doing for the past 2 years and show you the numbers while I was having coffee with my community in Arizona and Mexico every single day. Looks impressive. More than 160 messages per day on average in our WhatsApp group. Can you imagine that? It's like, I love it. Can be overwhelming, but it's nice. But let's do it our way. This is also how a cafecito looks like. Here in Connect Arizona, we're actually reading the coffee, literally, because we chat every single day with our community. Why it is important to change the narrative? We as local journalists, as entrepreneurs, as media leaders, we break silence. We fill the gap. We build bridges. We talk. We're having cafecitos every single day. And we understand that we. It's not us versus them. It's we, the community that we serve. We're part of it. And we need to get it. So that's why my capstone project tries to understand the question of how to measure impact beyond the numbers. The impact of community media cannot be always measured with the same traditional tools. So how do we measure success? Just as these journalist projects like mine are not traditional, so an unconventional tool is actually necessary to measure their effectiveness, the reach, and the community impact. We can do this by using more voices and testimonials and fewer stats and page views. So as part of my research, I interviewed more than 400 members of my community through WhatsApp, text messages, and Mentimeter. 8 media outlets fill out a survey, and I had informal conversation with 14 others on the same topic. These are the questions that I ask. How do you measure success? What specific metrics do you use? How do you use those metrics to prove that you're actually having an impact? What is your organization's superpower? And what is the biggest barriers that you have to use that superpower? So obviously 5 minutes are not enough to share all what I learned and what I still need to do. Changing a narrative takes time, but I'll be happy to have a cafecito with you. The link is in the chat, and I can talk to you a little bit more about my custom project a más profundidad because we speak Spanish. So, but we all came to the same conclusion. While you can measure community impact using just one tool, we found that the best metric is the testimonial. But these are takeaways. Listen, experiment, explode, innovate, invest in community media, have conversations, change narratives, invest big in small, more than those 5Ks that you're offering just to save local journalists. So I'm going to tell you how Connect Arizona impact is measured with the heart, in the testimonials of the members of the group, in our heated conversations about politics of gender, with the bridges that we built, in the strong community that we have created, en español, in the change of the narrative about Latinos and immigration. with the inspiration to write about ourselves with the full awareness that we are the story. And well, we have many superpowers: trust, dialogue, community. What is mine as a leader? Resilience. And I can be annoyingly positive. And yes, I am the woo. Well, I am Maritza Felix. I am a barista of news con acento y con talento. And te invito un cafecito. Let's talk. Thank you so much for my community, my Connect Arizona people that are connecting right now. Thank you. Now, from la Isla del Encanto, con toda la candela boricua, mi queridísimo Noel Algarín.
Hi, thank you, Maritza. As Maritza said, my name is Noel Algarín Martinez, and I come from Puerto Rico. I have a few thoughts about leadership, transformation, and my journey in this incredible program. And I made a video. I made a video about it. So let's roll it. The last 10 years have seen a profound change in the media industry in Puerto Rico, mainly impacted by the collapse of the economy and a series of natural disasters. In that period, our government declared bankruptcy. We were hit by two of the strongest hurricanes on record, a 6.4 earthquake, and as if all that wasn't enough, the COVID-19 pandemic was declared and all of us were sent home to make sense of what was happening. To give you an example, at the start of 2012, there were 4 daily pay newspapers on the island. Today, only one has a paid subscription model, both for print and digital, on a market where almost all news media can be accessed for free. The global crisis created by the pandemic made me reflect on the future of a local news ecosystem and what it would look like in the next decade. It also provided an opportunity to look inward and think about my journey of more than 20 years as a journalist and a leader in an ever-changing industry. This is how I ended up applying to the executive program in news innovation and leadership, convinced that it would help me find answers to some of the questions floating around in my head about the present and future of journalism and how to lead in uncertain times. I found plenty of answers, but the questions, let's just say they have increased. And that's not a bad thing, because when you look for answers, you're going to push for change. I believe the next 10 years carry a large sense of urgency for the future of Puerto Rico's media. To fulfill the mission of informing, empowering, and giving meaning and context to our audiences about events that take place in our country, we first need to guarantee that we will be here to report on those stories, supported with an economically sustainable operation. Among the many lessons that these programs taught me, one is that journalists can no longer afford to live with their backs turned to how the industry operates. The more they know about business models and trends, the better prepared they will be to make a difference and adapt to change. Also, for those of us that work in newsrooms, we must put our journalists in a position to evolve, be creative, and hopefully succeed. One way to do it is through education. I believe that if we can give our journalists the tools and knowledge to produce audience-centered journalism with a product mindset, we will see results that engage our readers and help us reach our business goals. For my capstone project, I decided to develop a training program for journalists that will focus on a range of topics covering hard and soft skills, going from best practices on how to engage, grow, and reach new audiences to discussions about social issues that affect the communities that we cover and serve. This will help continue the path to digital integration and make our staff more sensible to important social issues. To put it in place, it will be important to listen to the people we want to impact. These are not times to lead by intuition or by what I think is best, but taking into account what others have to say and use that insight to make informed decisions and consolidate a strategy. So first, we listen, then we evaluate, implement, and finally, we measure. The creation of a training program will serve several purposes. Among them, invest in the improvement of our talent, establish a culture of development, help with retention in a competitive and dynamic job market, and finally, develop skills on our staff that will help us meet strategic goals. To wrap up, I wanted to say that as members of this cohort, we are committed to fulfilling the mission on which this program was founded by Jeff Jarvis, to change not only journalism, but to make newsrooms better places where diversity and talent thrive. For the past year, I've been in the company of a group of diverse and brilliant professionals that not only want to lead, but also want to make a difference in the media industry. I feel fortunate to have been a part of this group. It's something that I will cherish forever. I admire you. You inspire me. Thank you.
Thank you. A couple of words. Thank you to my wife that helped me produce this video. I love you. And my mom is watching, bendición. And thank you to Jeff, Anita, Mayuri, Melissa, when we started. It's been a great pleasure to be in a part of this program in a institution that has such strong ties to the Puerto Rican community. So thank you and keep in touch. And now, thank you. I'll leave you with my colleague, my dear colleague, Rosalind Warren.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rosalind Warren, and I'm here to talk about why secrecy over salaries is entrenching the gender and ethnicity pay gap across the journalism industry, why it's time for more transparency, and why I'm asking newsrooms in the UK to post the pay in job listings. We all know the pay gap is a problem. The global gender pay gap is estimated at 23%. Women, ethnic minorities, LGBTQ, and people with disabilities are historically marginalized and suffer the most from these pay gaps. And something that's keeping pay gaps in place is a lack of transparency around salaries. One way the journalism industry can create a fairer playing field would be to be transparent about salaries in job postings. I found that the overall majority of job postings in newsrooms in the UK are advertised without stating the pay or say dependent on experience or competitive pay. Not a single UK newsroom posts a pay for all of their job postings. And here's why that's a problem. Firstly, telling people to negotiate for their salary doesn't help. It works to keep the status quo in place. Studies have found telling women to negotiate more and differently can often backfire or actually have adverse effects. And a 2021 study found that Black employees are twice as likely to be turned down for a pay increase after negotiation than white people. Secondly, it creates a secrecy culture that chips away at morale, where newsrooms discipline employees for discussing pay, or where salaries are discussed secondhand through gossip and whisper networks, and not known openly through, say, transparent salary ranges tied to the jobs and the responsibilities and titles. Finally, people with financial stress are put in an even more difficult position. So if you have care responsibilities or debt, or simply want to secure a good salary because of financial insecurity, the last thing you want to do is apply for a job, go through multiple interviews, wait 3 months to get to the final stage, and only then find out the salary isn't enough for you to live on. But the good news, salary transparency helps create more equal newsrooms. Research conducted around the world routinely shows that pay transparency helps reduce the gender wage gap and creates a more equal workplace. This is especially important in the UK, where the journalism industry has a huge class problem. Some 51% of leading journalists and 80% of editors are privately educated, which is staggering when just 7% of British people are privately educated overall. Transparency over pay and fairer hiring practices is a growing trend globally too. Earlier this month, the EU presented a proposal requiring employees to provide salary ranges in job ads. In the US, they're already making laws across the country calling for pay transparency. including here in New York City, where employees must post salary ranges in job ads from May. This comes after Colorado, California, Washington, and many other states which have introduced similar laws. But in the UK, while there is a growing effort to tackle pay secrecy, there is nothing far-reaching enough in place yet. There needs to be a much stronger effort in the UK to call for pay transparency in journalism. So today I'm launching the Post the Pay, a project that encourages newsrooms to post a salary attached to the job. That comes with a Twitter account, which you can all follow, that will ask newsrooms to post salaries, as well as share updates on pay transparency efforts. There's also a website to provide more detail on what I've spoken about here. And down the line, I plan to work with newsrooms to tackle these types of hiring practices and other barriers for people entering the industry. Sharing the salary in job postings is not a magic fix. Pay gaps are deep-rooted, and there will be bumps along the way, but it is a useful first step to help change who has access to journalism as a career and who is shut out or paid less. Thank you for listening. And now my wonderful colleague, Sul, is up next.
I don't see the speaker notes. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm still a little bit technologically inept with PowerPoint. Hi, everyone. I'm Sewell Chan, and I've just been so proud and thrilled to be part of this leadership cohort, this executive program in nonprofit, this executive program in news innovation and leadership over the past year. Last year, after 21 years in newspapers, I was offered the chance to lead the Texas Tribune, a nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom I've admired since it was founded in 2009. This executive program, which I started when I was still at the Los Angeles Times, has been a perfect segue into my new role. For the past 6 months, I've gotten to know my new colleagues, and for my capstone project, I've spoken to numerous nonprofit news leaders, including 2 in this very program. What quickly became apparent to me is that traditional career pathways are going by the wayside. Boundaries between print and digital are blurring. So are the traditional boundaries separating commercial, public, and nonprofit media. It also became clear to me that nonprofit news leaders have an especially important role, as we represent one of the few fast-growing areas within journalism. Philanthropic support for journalism is growing as more foundations and donors recognize how seriously the information ecosystem has eroded. Nonprofit newsrooms don't have the vast resources of global news organizations like Bloomberg or the century-plus history of legacy newspapers. We also don't have the same baggage of legacy institutions. Most nonprofit newsrooms operating today didn't even exist 20 years ago. And most nonprofit news leaders today started their careers at legacy organizations, which often means that we have different perspectives and backgrounds than those of our younger employees. I'm hearing from more and more young journalists who say they only want to work in nonprofit or public media. Those journalists need to be convinced that managers with more traditional backgrounds like myself can understand and serve them. I joined the Tribune knowing that Evan Smith, our visionary co-founder and CEO, formerly a magazine editor, plans to retire before the end of this year after a remarkable 13-year tenure. Not knowing who my next boss will be can be stressful at times, but I have confidence in our board and in the search firm leading the process for finding Evan's successor. If you know anyone who is great at fundraising, loves journalism, and has Texas roots, let me know. When Evan announced his plans, he said he had founder's disease and didn't want to be an obstacle to change. He also called on a new generation of news leaders to rise to the challenge of covering a state where 60% of the population is Hispanic, Black, or Asian. I find that commitment inspiring. For my capstone, I interviewed leaders at a handful of news organizations, and I saw patterns in successful transitions. Knowing what type of leadership is needed, aligning the board and the staff around key objectives, consulting with current employees, and running a transparent process are all critical. It's also important to be realistic. No candidate will check every box. Searches should focus on the qualities that are most important. No more than 3, I would argue. It's also important for succession planning to be an expectation of every single manager. My own succession planning began my first day on the job. I am looking to cultivate, nurture, and empower leaders who will be ready to take my place years from now. Journalists at nonprofits that have had difficult transitions told me about their experiences. Leaders who resigned abruptly and without advance notice. A string of leaders coming and going, none with enough time or patience to make lasting progress. One nonprofit newsroom has had 5 CEOs since 2014. At the Texas Tribune, I was the 3rd editor-in-chief in less than 2 years. In at least 2 newsrooms I examined, new editors-in-chief have been named without staff being consulted or notified. And in both cases, the editors had to overcome substantial skepticism as they started their jobs. I also heard about leadership positions that went unfilled for months, even over a year, a situation that might prompt staff to wonder why a leader is needed at all. As a field, we need to take transitions from search to recruitment, onboarding, training, and career advancement seriously for all employees, including leadership. I plan to turn some of these findings into an essay for public distribution. As the field of nonprofit journalism grows, the organizations that take transitions seriously, with boards that are trying to look far into the future, will be the ones best equipped to anticipate and manage change. Thank you. And now I'm very happy to turn over the mic to my colleague, Shayna Black.
Good afternoon, everyone. When I began this program, Jeff Jarvis asked our cohort, who will save the industry? And my initial thought, of course, was, well, that sounds like a big job, and it sounds like a job for Superman. But why Superman? Well, much like his alter ego, Clark Kent, he was also a reporter and journalist. I also believe that we as reporters are superheroes. We're often the second responders when news breaks. But then as I thought about this a little more, I found out that Clark Kent got frustrated with all the new changes in media, and he quit his job at the Daily Planet in 2012. So again, we're kind of alike. And also because, well, Superman's from Cleveland and I'm from Cleveland. But since we are all Superman as journalists, my next question began, who saved Superman? The answer is, we as journalists have to save ourselves. But unfortunately for me, Jeff didn't say who will save the industry. He said, you will save the industry. To which I thought, who, me? Who am I to take on this task? Well, I started thinking about it. And for my capstone, I did a little bit of reflection. My name is Shayna Black, and I'm the founder of Black Girl Media, where we like to tell the stories and create products that engage audiences, informs audiences, and reaches communities that I may not be a part of. So what I'm going to do today is talk about how I, as a community media leader, have gone on to create some great brands that have helped impact a variety of communities. First, in 2018, was our flagship program, Black Girl in the CLE, that was started with trying to just inform Black women in Cleveland. We realized that people weren't getting the information they needed and were feeling hostile about their lives and feeling run down. We also created a podcast for a local nonprofit that's the firsthand story of a family living with infant loss. We often talk about how women respond when they don't make it full term, but what about the dad? What about the brothers and sisters that were expecting to be the new big brother? How does that impact the family? And my newest project is called The Cleanagers, and it's by Cleveland teenagers, all high school students, where it's totally student run, for teens by teens. And they cover issues that I, as an adult, couldn't even imagine. And what is that like being a high schooler after COVID? All of our shows and brands are on major podcast platforms, so you can check them out. And I am very proud of all their successes. But besides the brands, I've done a lot of work with community engagement events and bringing people together just to talk. While I may not have capacitos like Maritza, getting with our community is majorly important because we need to know what's happening. Just in November, we had a voter registration drive and started our Conversations in Cleveland series with the question, what concerns you most about living in Cleveland? And the answers were astounding. And most recently, I did a collaboration with our local SJN collab about making sure that people didn't face utility disconnections. I mention this because we covered the digital divide by making sure that this is available in local libraries for folks, but also a Spanish version. And so yet again, collaboration was key. And no, I don't speak Spanish, but I had to rely on our Spanish friends. So what's next for me? And that's a question that we've all in this room wondered. What happens when we go back on Monday? Well, for me, I'm going to go back to Cleveland and continue to work and develop the Cleanagers. But I'm also open for new ideas. I'm an innovator and a creative, and so I'm looking for always constant inspiration. But for you, what's next is a few key takeaways. Remember, when trying to save the industry, out-of-the-box solutions require an environment that supports ideas and implements new actions. We cannot continue to do the same things just with a different funding method. Respect is called for. Community media or identity-based media, a term I learned here at CUNY, or hyperlocal platforms are legitimate news organizations, and they work to inform and create products that inform communities. Just so you know, many hyperlocal community platforms are for-profit industries. So if you're a nonprofit that can't figure out how to fund us, it might be another way to think about how to connect with us. I wouldn't leave the burden on people that are just trying to make things better. And finally, collaborate and consult. Don't poach. I've gotten plenty of calls saying, hey, Shana, I'd love to do an event. Let's go to one of your neighborhoods so I can report on it. We don't want to do that. We're fiercely loyal and protective of our audiences. And instead of saying, let's go to coffee so I can pick your brain, maybe ask, what's your consulting fee? We're happy to talk. We're happy to collab. We're happy to support, because at the end of the day, we're all about supporting our community. And finally, you don't have to recreate the wheel. Realize if you're in a major, large legacy company, think about all the meetings you have to go for innovation. You talk to this department and that department, and what does engineering say? When working with community media, we go from ideas to implementation and speed of thought. So work and connect and reach out with us, because we'll save you some time and we'll definitely save you some meetings. In closing, I'd like to thank my amazing cohort for believing in me. I'd like to thank Anita and Jeff for constantly pushing me forward. And I'm just so honored to be here. Please connect with me. I would love to continue the conversation. And I say thank you. Finally, I would like to welcome my cohort member and fellow change agent, Soraya.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I know it's been a long Zoom, but thanks for coming. My name is Soraya Membreno, and today I want to talk to you about identity-based media. By now, you're probably familiar with the history of the local news crisis, the rise of the internet and social media, plummeting advertising revenues, ruthless hedge fund owners. Things looked pretty bleak for a while there. But in 2022, that tide is turning. The decline of local news has been acknowledged as a crisis. Awareness about the impact of that decline has been raised, and support in the form of cohorts, accelerator programs, and even funding have been secured. The net effect of these efforts is already being felt. The local news sector is staging a comeback. But there's another corner of the media ecosystem that is facing a similar crisis and that could use a similar spotlight: identity-based media. Local media helps people navigate the physical community that they live in, but two people living in the same neighborhood can experience that community very differently depending on their identity. That is a space that identity-based media occupies. Instead of grouping by proximity, identity-based media creates community out of people's self-identification in a way that spans geography, which means these outlets tend not to have a regional focus. In addition, based on surveys conducted for this project, we found that these outlets tend to be on the smaller side, that they consider paywalls antithetical to their mission, and that over half of them are actually not nonprofits, and that they have had almost zero luck accessing media-specific support or thought partnership. And that has everything to do with how the qualifying criteria of media support organizations are defined. The second part of this project consisted of a survey of media support organizations to gather information on their qualifying criteria. Based on their own qualifying criteria, the hypothetical outlet that qualified for inclusion in all the media support organizations in the survey would be an outlet that is both a nonprofit and that has a regional focus. Outlets that are nonprofits but do not have a local focus, they can typically meet the criteria of about 2 and 4 media support organizations. But for-profit organizations without a local focus, those now only meet the criteria of 1 in 4 media support organizations. And that profile is where the majority of identity-based media outlets actually live. What this means is that as it stands today, identity-based media outlets have nowhere to turn in times of market crisis. The goal of this capstone project was to demonstrate that without rethinking our funding and support criteria, or building new frameworks altogether, hint, hint, that we might lose a sector of the media landscape that had succeeded in cultivating deep relationships and trust with the very communities that so much of the industry is still struggling to reach. But what I found instead is that that future is already here. These outlets are already disappearing. I came to CUNY's executive program in news innovation and leadership as the publisher of an independent nonprofit feminist media outlet. Over the course of just 5 years, I've watched over half of the identity-based outlets that I used to reach out to as peer organizations shut down for good, despite producing award-winning work that their readers cared deeply about. The silver lining this time is that we know how to make strategic interventions to save a sector. We did it for local, and we can do it again if we can acknowledge the role that identity-based media outlets play for readers that feel underserved by mainstream media. As an industry, we're finally starting to have conversations about a new era of journalism, one that values community engagement and serving historically marginalized communities. Identity-based media has been doing that work all along. And not only are they being left behind by the rules and criteria that dictate who has access to thought partnership and support, they're on the brink of disappearing altogether. But what if we did for these outlets what we did for local? The existence of identity-based media outlets makes the field better, stronger, and more trustworthy. They fill in gaps and widen our notions of who a news consumer can even be. The question for us as media leaders is, are we ready to talk about expanding traditional notions of journalism to include identity-based media? I obviously am, and I hope that you will join me. So thank you. I pass it off to our amazing closer, Tiff.
Hi, I'm Tiff. I'm from the New York Times, and my capstone centers around data journalism and cross-newsroom projects and bringing a product development mindset to the earliest steps of a project. The core questions for my capstone included, in part, how do we currently pitch cross-newsroom collaborations? How can non-bosses like me set a higher bar when pitching collaborations? And can that bar incorporate product development practices by default? None of this is new territory, but our newsrooms all take different approaches. There are many highly collaborative news organizations that already share approaches and tactics. There's an entire conference on the topic, which I will be attending sometime soon. And there's common examples we all know about. That's reporting projects typically, but more recently we've seen data and technology heavy efforts emerge within these collaborations. The Panama Papers or the COVID tracking project are great examples of this. For these data heavy collaborations, most likely they're going to produce a thing, where a thing might be reporting, of course, maybe software and tools, perhaps some open source data, white papers, all of the above, whatever. But in treating these collaborations as a product could really help a lot. From the very beginning, in fact. And my research on this started last year. We asked a group of people who joined us to list everything we'd seen for cross-newsroom stuff. They came from many different newsrooms and shapes, and they shared their favorite resources. And from this, I've set up a mini website, which is linked here, and I believe is also going to be linked in the chat. This site is live, and it explains this capstone pretty much like what you're hearing now, so pay attention to me, not the site. It also puts collaborations into small, medium, and large t-shirt size groupings, which are sort of an abstract sense of scale where you don't have to define too much up front, but everyone kind of understands the differences. This was the pattern that resonated best with peers, and it also happens to echo Agile's product development practices and methodologies. I have a good sized list of things that a collaboration pitch could include, depending on the size of the project. And the idea would be people would copy paste what we might need for projects, which might include guidelines about the collaboration itself, product or project development tactics, also anticipating boss level questions. And all of these items on the list come from collaborative news organizations with proven value already seen in their work. So these are things that actually are very effective. And I would hope that this helps socialize those norms to newsrooms that don't do this as frequently. My roadmap has my next steps. I'm also tracking my work in a public project board tied to my code because I'm a nerd. But what I wanted to use some time today, just a little bit, to talk about a product strategy tool that I think could make this all quite a bit more helpful, especially for pitches. The framework is called Types of Wins, and my advisor, David, had me use it on my capstone concept itself. So I had to apply this myself to this exact thing. And as we worked through it, though, we realized it actually helps build a pretty good pitch. So here's the quick version in bullets. First group is insight wins. And this is expertise gained by everybody. Another way of thinking about what insight wins could be, it would be things that decision makers like bosses could immediately understand and buy into. So these are things that would be like, yes, and what else? Grouping those together is incredibly helpful, and you can actually get a lot of stuff jammed in there. The next group is process wins. These are new tools or things you want to try out or pilot to see if they'll be helpful. And the goal there for this group is to find things that accelerate this project, but also mini projects to come. The third group is capability wins. These are existing resources and workflows that you've already planned to bring you and other collaborating news organizations. Also opportunities to talk about staff skill building and releveling. And this group is really about habits that this project will help build and help you deliver high quality work. So the part one was about planning a collaboration and the things you expect to have happen during it. Part two focuses on anticipating its outcomes. Outcome wins are basically things that you've earned, the things you've banked. And these would be things that shape future projects. And impact wins, this is actually a special subset just for journalism that we broke out ourselves. This would really be the traditional stuff you expect to know about, audience response. And once you do publish, like, what do you expect to have happen? What are the follow-up actions? Those ought to be also fairly easy sells for people because that's really where we spend a little bit more time. So for people editing a checklist together and front-loading these product-minded decisions, refining a pitch with types of wins could be really, really helpful. Even if you can't yet tell people you're using type of wins, because that's a little too product-y, we want to try to use it to tactically get to their yeses faster. So I'm hoping to be able to lead people into applying types of wins to really refine what their pitch process is and really build a very comprehensive thing. And I am pretty much out of time, so thank you very much. Thank you. And now we're going to have some closing remarks from Anita, who's been just absolutely amazing throughout this entire program, and we adore her deeply.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. I'm not going to keep us long because I know those were 2 full and amazing 2 hours. I want to thank all the participants who did this amazing work while having big jobs, while taking care of their families, while living through a pandemic and endemic like the whole world did, still being present for classes, still doing amazing capstone projects, preparing these presentations. So my thank you goes to them. It goes to the alumni, the speakers, the instructors, the coaches who've been here with us today. Thank you so much for generously sharing your time. It goes to my partner in crime, Jeff Jarvis, without whom none of this would be possible, and to our Dean and Associate Dean, Sarah Bartlett and Andy Mendelson here at the school, who supported this program from the very beginning. And it also goes to my team, the amazing J+ team, who are here today helping with these presentations and without whom this never would have worked out. It's been the honor of my life to lead these programs as a program director. This is actually the last cohort that I lead as program director because I'm moving back to my native Austria, but I will stay deeply engaged with this program. I'll continue teaching and coaching. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who's part of this amazing community. Together, we're going to change the world of media, and I'm so proud of everyone who's involved. Thank you. Feel free to stay in touch. You know that we opened applications for the next program today. Drop me an email, look on the website, reach out to participants. We'll also share the recording of the presentation on Monday or Tuesday early next week with everyone who signed up for the Zoom. Thank you and have a fantastic rest of the day.